So in this video I'm going to revisit my 486 dx2 66 MHz. Now although it works fine, it actually boots up and shows something on the screen, there are some issues with it. The battery has leaked considerably on the motherboard, so we'll need to take a look at that. I'm also going to take this opportunity to disassemble the entire system and go over every component that's in it. So our main focus area is going to be here, which is the battery that has leaked considerably. So we'll need to take a look at that. Now as you can see, the battery has leaked all kinds of junk onto the motherboard. It has impacted a lot of traces, resistors and other components. So we'll start by unplugging everything and removing the expansion cards from the motherboard so that we can remove the motherboard altogether. So first off, we have a pretty standard Visa Local Bus I/O controller card. It has the LED for the hard drive. And it's a standard card with one ID controller for the hard drive. It's from Compass Lab. I didn't find not much information on it. It has expansion headers for serial ports. It uses the standard WinBond chipset that you see on a lot of these I/O controller cards. So here we have the expansion bracket for another COM port, and it also has a parallel port. So pretty standard stuff. So moving on to the next and final expansion card, which is the video card. Now this is a pretty interesting one. It's a Visa Local Bus video card from Diamond Computer Systems. It's a Speedstar Pro Visa Local Bus. This was one of the popular and powerful cards in the early 90s from Diamond Systems, before the Speedstar brand actually became known for more moderate video cards. So this was pretty advanced back in the day. Now obviously this was before the whole 3D accelerated graphics came along, but excellent for MS-DOS gaming. So next up we'll remove the power connector from the motherboard. And we'll unscrew the single screw that is holding the motherboard onto the case. So it's always a bit fiddly to get the motherboard out of the case, but yeah, here it is. So we have a nice little board with the Intel Overdrive CPU on it. A very nice chip. We've got 8 megabytes of RAM, and we have the culprit here, which is the leaking battery. So as you can see, a lot of junk on the motherboard. Even the ISA slot looks greenish, and also the microcontroller socket that you see there. But more on that later. We'll start with the disassembly of the system by removing the ID cables and the power connectors, so that we can remove the hard drive, floppy drive, and CD-ROM drive. Now, funnily enough, the hard drive was actually put in place by this piece of wood. I think they put it there due to ID cable length limitations. I mean, you need to hook up a floppy drive and a hard drive and route the cables back to the ID controller. So in a desktop case like this, you need quite lengthy cables. So I'm guessing that's the reason why the hard drive is located there. So yeah, so you can see here that something actually broke off. Never had this before with these not so cheap screwdrivers. But with a new screwdriver in place, we can finally remove the hard drive from its 5 1/4 inch drive bay. So I'm just gonna slide it out. Here we have the piece of wood holding everything in place. And we can see that it's a Seagate drive. So this is a 261 megabyte drive. So let's flip it around. And we can see the rework that was done on the PCB, probably by Seagate itself when it was done at the factory. I love these old PCBs at the back of these old hard drives. So next up I'll be removing the bracket that holds the disk drive in place, because it's the only way to actually remove the disk drive from the system. So for the final component, which is the CD-ROM drive, all we need to do is unscrew these 4 screws here, and it will just slide out. So with the case all empty now, it's time to take a look at the various components which were in the system. We have our two VisaLocal bus cards, the graphics cards and the I/O controller card. We have the main board with our Intel Overdrive chip, 8 megabytes of RAM. We have our Seagate hard drive, a standard 1.44 megabyte disk drive, and our 24-speed CD-ROM drive. Now I will be adding this Soundblaster 16 sound card onto the system in order to play some games with it. Now the PC didn't come with the sound card, but it's quite essential if you want to do any type of MS-DOS based gaming on this machine. So we'll be hooking that up. So here we have a view of the 486 motherboard with the Intel Overdrive 486 CPU installed. So these types of overdrive CPUs were typically used to upgrade existing systems. So this is a dx2, giving us a core CPU frequency of 66 MHz on a 33 MHz board frequency. So it uses a 2.0 clock multiplier and was typically used to upgrade 486 systems that were running on 33 MHz, effectively doubling their core frequency from 33 to 66. The motherboard also comes with 3 VisaLocal bus expansion slots that are typically used for like video cards or controller cards, as well as 4 additional 16-bit ISO slots. As far as memory is concerned, the motherboard is fully loaded with 8 megabytes of RAM. So I think initially it had like 4 megabytes of RAM, but it was later upgraded to 8 megabytes. Given that there are 2 different types of SIM modules installed. So these are standard 72-pin SIM modules, 1 megabyte each. I remember back in the day having also only 4 megabytes of RAM and having to sell my electric guitar in order to have a 4 megabyte upgrade to 8 megabytes of RAM. Next up on the motherboard we have the level 2 cache. It's comprised of 8 chips, holding 32 kilobytes each, making up for a total of 256 kilobytes of level 2 cache. But the main problem area of this board is located here, which is the battery. So if you take a closer look, you can see that it has reached quite a bit of havoc on the motherboard. So the ISO slot is compromised, the jumper you see here is totally baked in, the resistors, the pins have been corroded. So this entire area here needs to be cleaned up fairly thoroughly. I suspect also beneath the microcontroller we will see some corrosion. Looking at the back of the motherboard, we see the same thing. So before we start cleaning, we're going to be removing the root cause of the issue, which is the battery itself. So I'm just going to be heating up one of the pins one by one. And normally it should come right off. So you can see the solder melting and it has come off. Now sometimes, as you can see here on the second pin, it takes a little bit more of an effort to get it removed. So what we'll be doing here is we're going to be applying some extra solder onto the pin in order to get it out more easily. So here I'm just applying a little bit of solder onto the pin. And now it should come off more easily. And yep, there it is. Now with the battery removed, we have a clear view of the motherboard and the impacted area. So I'm just going to be using a toothbrush to get rid of most of the stuff, or at least try. So as you can see, it's pretty much cooked into the board and the pins. So I'm going to be removing this jumper also to get more access to these pins. I'm just going to scrape off most of the crud which is on there. This little ring here is totally baked on to the board as well. So I'm going to be using some white vinegar to get rid of most of the the battery leakage here on the board. So I'm just going to dip this cotton swab and just gently go over the impacted areas. And as you can see, it will kind of sizzle away all of the crud that came from the battery. So we're not going to be using too much. We're just going to kind of dip it onto the motherboard. And as you can see, it will slowly remove the battery acid from the board. Like I said, you don't want to be using too much, as you know, the vinegar, it's not the most healthy product to put on a PCB or on electrical components. But as long as you're not like soaking the motherboard into the vinegar, it should be okay. I found that using something like isopropyl alcohol alone simply doesn't cut it when the motherboard is too far gone, like in this case. But with the vinegar, it actually cleans it up really nicely. So we're just going to dip it onto these little resistors here, the little legs. Now we're just going to be continuing doing that just until most of the green corrosion has been removed. So as you can see, it will clean up pretty nicely. You can also see some corrosion on the keyboard connector. Now it isn't all that bad on this board. Sometimes you really need to desolder the keyboard connector because underneath it will be just corroded all over the place. Luckily, it's not the case here. So not all of the corrosion is in visible places. For example, here underneath this IC in the socket, some pins have also started to corrode, so we'll need to remove the IC here in order to get access to the actual socket. Now you really shouldn't be using a screwdriver to remove an IC from its sockets, as there are specialized tools for it, but I didn't have one at hand at the time. Now as you can see here, the pins on this IC haven't really been impacted, so that's a good thing. But the socket, however, is a different story. So you can see here the green gooey on the socket. So we're going to be cleaning that up again using vinegar. So we're simply going to dip the socket in vinegar, and you can see it again sizzling away, getting rid of the green stuff. So we're going to continue doing that until everything is nice and clean. And while I'm in here, I'm also going to be using some contact cleaner to put into the socket and give it a good brush. Moving to the back of the motherboard, we see that several solder joints and traces have been impacted as well. So again, we'll add some vinegar. You will see it sizzling away, and the green corrosion will disappear. Now luckily none of the traces here have been too badly damaged, so we won't be needing to do any rework on this board, which is a good thing. I'm just going to be using some isopropyl alcohol to get rid of the excess vinegar that might still be on the motherboard. So we're just going to give it a good cleaning with the isopropyl alcohol. So all in all, the motherboard has cleaned up pretty nicely. So I think all of the green gunk from the battery has been removed. I won't be putting in a new battery right now. There is a connector on the board for an external battery, so I might take a look at that. But I'm anxious to test to see if the motherboard still works. So we'll be popping in the microcontroller in its socket back again and seeing if the board still boots. So I'm going to be putting the motherboard back into its case. Adding in the video card so that we can see if the boot procedure is working fine. Attach the PC speaker so that we can get audible feedback if we don't see anything on the screen. Attaching the power supply connectors to the motherboard. And I'm going to power it up. So notice it's displaying 33 megahertz here. That's because the turbo button simply isn't attached to the motherboard at this time. But the computer boots, it does its memory test, and everything seems to be fine. It obviously doesn't find the CMOS settings because it's lacking a battery, but that's okay for now. So now we can continue with the assembly by adding in our controller card. Hooking up the hard drive LED onto the controller card. Attaching the rest of the LEDs and buttons of the front of the case. And I'm also going to take this opportunity to install this Creative Soundblaster 16 from 1996 onto this 486 computer. And with all of the peripherals attached to the controller, disk drive, CD-ROM, hard drive, it's time to close the case, install the Soundblaster drivers, attach some speakers, and do what I've always wanted to do with this system. I have fond memories playing MicroProse Formula 1 Grand Prix on a very similar system. It was a 486 dx2 66 megahertz, and I absolutely loved this game. So it's really nice to be able to recreate this feeling with this 486 dx2 66 megahertz. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe. There's lots more retro content coming your way. For now, I have my afternoon set out. I'm going to be playing some Formula 1 Grand Prix, and I hope to see you guys soon. Bye bye.